I kind of had my original era with psychedelics back in the 60s and early 70s and was deep into that world with LSD and mescaline and psilocybin. And then I got completely away from it forever. And I've only recently sort of started re-engaging that well in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years as I saw this new movement emerge and got very interested, especially in the research showing how deeply beneficial some of these psychotherapeutic models are for people suffering severe trauma, especially veterans.
Welcome, tribe. I'm Maya Rose.
And I'm Gerald Rogers. We're about to embark on another mind-expanding episode where we dive deep into the realms of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
This is a transformational experience of healing, manifestation, increased clarity, flow, and alignment.
So join us on this sacred journey as we receive the codes of transformation from scientists and psychonauts, shamans, tantra masters, mystics, and more.
Together, we'll unravel the secrets of plant medicine, sex magic, and other tools to tap into higher states of consciousness.
So why are we here? To answer the call, to share our passions and be advocates for alternative healing.
So get ready for a ride that transcends the ordinary and leads you to the extraordinary, because living a legendary life is not just a choice.
It's a sacred adventure. Welcome, my beloved tribe. Today, we're going to dive deep into questions about how to access these higher states of consciousness, even without plant medicine. How do we open up our hearts and open up our minds and create coherence in our field so that we can show up as the most powerful creators who we're meant to be? How do we really stay centered in a chaotic world around us, no matter what's happening? And so I'm deeply honored to introduce you to one of my soul brothers, Dr. Fleet Maull, who is one of the greatest mindfulness experts, that walking the planet right now. And I know that's a big statement, but after 50 years that Fleet has devoted to mindfulness practices and the work that he's done to cultivate his very own mindfulness practice called Neurosomatic meditation, and through all of his experience and the work that he does with the Heart Mind Institute, which is like this massive engine for broadcasting consciousness to the planet. I feel like really honored and very grateful to introduce him to any of my audience that hasn't met him yet. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Dr. Fleet Maull. I want to begin with this question, because I know you have been through a wild journey in the soul curriculum of your life, which included, was it 14 years that you were incarcerated? Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to take us back to that time. And first of all, share with the audience, like what led to that, but then also what was the gift in that for your soul in exploring and discovering who you are and your purpose in the world?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the thumbnail sketch there. So you can tell by the gray hair, I'm a baby boomer, and I came of age in the 60s. I actually graduated from high school in 1968, which was a very tumultuous year in U.S. history with all the assassinations and the Kent State killings. And at any rate, I was a young, classic angry young man, big hole in my gut that I was trying to fill up with everything. Coming out, I grew up in a basically good family in the Midwest, but we had alcoholism in my family, and that really impacted me in my childhood, created all this psychic splitting, and had this big hole in my gut I'm trying to fill up with substances and experiences and sex, drugs, and rock and roll and everything else, and to try to keep the pain at bay. And so I went headlong into the counterculture of that time, but I was always a spiritual seeker, and I had a deep longing to reconnect with something authentic, something genuine, something real that I had felt plugged into early in my childhood. And I really wanted it back. And so, I really just went into all of that and a lot of craziness, but there was this through line of being a spiritual seeker all along. And kind of what that led to was that living outside of the country as an expatriate, justifying that with a lot of first time thinking, falling into small scale drug smuggling and justifying that with a lot of us versus them thinking. But then continuing my spiritual journey and eventually going back and getting a master's degree, doing a really deep 3-year clinical training program with an integration of both Buddhist and Western psychologies and psychotherapies, and connecting with my first spiritual teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, an iconic figure of the 70s and 80s in the U.S. the founder of Neuropa Institute, Neuropa University. And so, I had got in this really deep path and still had this shadow life I hadn't resolved, and was keeping secret from my teacher and so forth. And my marriage fell apart. I'm keeping the problems at bay with money. And anyway, before I could untangle all that, it caught up with me, and I earned my way into a long federal prison sentence for drug smuggling. And actually, I was originally sentenced to 30 years with no parole. I thought that I was 35 years old. I thought I'd be 65. In fact, the next day, the paper said I'd be 65 before I had any chance of release. And, I was absolutely devastated. I finally had to face all the selfish decisions I've been making. And my son was 9 years old, and I was going to grow up without a dad. And I basically left he and his mom high and dry. And they moved back to Peru, where his mom was from. So I went through this whole dark night of the soul around all that, and became just radically dedicated to get all the negativity out of my life and take everything I'd received from my family and my spiritual teacher and community and really do something positive with it and leave my son a better legacy than just his dad went to prison, or even his dad died in prison, because I had no surety that I would survive that time. Eventually, I figured out how the good time worked. Fortunately, I was sentenced under the old law before 87, and you got a lot of good time with a longer sentence. If you stayed out of trouble, they'd take it away from you in chunks if you're getting in trouble in prison. And on appeal, they knocked off 5 years off my sentence. So then I had 25, and on that, I knew I'd serve 14 and a half, which is what I did if I stayed out of trouble. It still felt like forever, and it wasn't a long stretch. But it really became my ashram time, my monastery time. I mean, the environment was nothing like an ashram or a monastery. Incredibly violent, negative, toxic. On a good day, you only had maybe a half dozen really demeaning experiences that assaulted your basic humanity. It's just a really, really rough place. But it was a maximum security federal prison, hospital. And so it wasn't as bad as some of the penitentiaries, but all the patients came from the penitentiary. So it was the same vibe, and it was security-wise, it was set up as a maximum security prison. And I just lived a life, a very disciplined life, practicing like my hair was on fire. I really knew the jig was up, and I had to really, really focus on my practice, but I was very involved in service. I had a day job teaching school for 14 years. So it was my 9 to 5 job, and started first hospice program in a prison anywhere in the world. With others, and that was a big part of my life, all my meal breaks and so forth up in the hospital, caring for men who were dying of AIDS and cancer and liver disease. And this was in the height of the AIDS epidemic that we started this. And I was teaching meditation, involved in 12-step work. So I was very dedicated life of service and practice and study. I already had a master's degree. I completed most of the work for a doctorate while I was in there. And took me a while to finish it when I got out because I got busy. But I really focused on myself. I knew once I knew how much time I would actually serve if I stayed out of trouble, then I knew I'd be about 50 years old when I was going to get out. And not easy to start a life at 50, especially when you got a serious criminal record and in debt to the federal government for taxes and all kinds of things. So I knew I had to really work at it, and all the work I did. And I really focused on that community. I mean, I was really trying to add value and be part of that community and add value there. But I knew if I ever did get out and survive, that would lead to good things. And it did, because I got out in 1999, which is some 25 years ago, and had nothing but opportunity ever since. Been traveling the world teaching, and more recent years developing the Heart Mind Institute work. But I really had a very rich life for the last 25 years that I've been out, and it really arose out of the work that I did while I was inside.
That is such an extraordinary experience, and I think one that most of us can't imagine, but it also reveals a lot of your character, to be put in a situation like that and to like really choose to make it, like how you called it, your ashram, to like really make that a sanctuary for your soul, to like really be in like the deepest crucible of defining for yourself who you're going to be, and I think of like Nelson Mandela and all these other people who like, go through these moments, but they chose to rise above the circumstance and become something more. And that's so inspiring to me. I would love, to hear about the evolution of neurosomatic mindfulness and the path and like why you felt called to create almost like this new aspect to mindfulness based on your practices. Can you give us a little bit of that history?
Yeah, sure. So Neurosomatic Mindfulness, it's really an integration of the work I've been doing for over 50 years, training deeply in both the Tibetan Buddhist and Zen traditions, and I'm an empowered teacher in both traditions. So I've gone very deep in those traditions, but I've also studied everything else you can imagine. Studied the books and also studied with various teachers in the Buddhist tradition and Zen, Vipassana, Tibetan, Vajrayana, all the different non-dual practices. I've explored all the secular non-dual teachers. Very involved in the mainstream mindfulness movement and prison work through the prison organizations that I started. So I'm colleagues with all the people in that kind of mainstream mindfulness movement. And Studying, all the different Vedic traditions. And, I've been kind of a universalist studying across all traditions, even though my primary spiritual path is very much grounded in the Buddhist tradition, and especially in the Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana tradition, which is I'm still deeply involved in today and working with teachers, my own teachers in that tradition. So and I've always been someone, just a natural integrator and synthesizer. So that's always kind of been my bent. And also always been really fascinated with neuroscience. And so I've been, studying that as deeply as I can, for the last 30 years. And so just continually integrating, and neurosomatic mindfulness as a model is continually evolving. But the baseline is that it's a very deeply embodied approach. And I was influenced, really my first teacher, although I didn't really get the message, my very first teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, really emphasized the body. And he made a very important distinction between connecting with what he called our psychosomatic body, which is like our conceptual body, which is actually a kind of well, the extent that anything's real, it's something, right? And it's really made up of our memories and our images of the body and our dialogue, our narrative about the body. But it's not the actual body. But when we relate to body, even the word body is just a concept. So if I just say body, I'm already in the world of concepts. Or even if I'm watching my breath, okay, that's still a conceptual overlay. So he talks about the sync between that and getting into what he called body, which is the direct experience of the actual sensations, the lived experience, the lived sensate experience that we can tune into, that is the landscape of sensation we call body or call breath, right? And so penetrating beneath the conceptual level, and our brain is set up to economize because we're exposed to trillions of bits of data all the time. The brain is mostly choosing what to ignore, right? And what to focus in on. And in order to economize its energy, it has to. And so the brain naturally very quickly replaces direct experience with concept. We're out walking around outside, we notice the trees and so forth. Are we really connecting with that living entity of the tree? Or does our brain very quickly just put in the concept or the image or the archetype of tree or whatever kind of tree? And that's really the way our brain works. So it requires a general effort really to penetrate through that conceptual layer into direct experience, right? And so that's really the ground. And I was very influenced, again, by my first teacher, but by working with other teachers, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyatso, who's a very incredible Tibetan yogi who's passed on recently, but really emphasized deep yogic body work as part of that tradition. My old friend colleague Reggie Ray, who had a approach called meditating with the body, and a lot of other influences that I really, at one point I just kind of found out how to open the channels to the inner landscape of the body. And it just became so compelling. It became something I just became forever fascinated with because it's almost like the last great frontier. It's like there's this limitless internal somatic landscape because our entire body is a sensory living organism, right? So all the way out, even the bones contain neuronal cells, even the outer white hard layer of the periosteum, the marrow of the bones, the musculature, the circulatory, lymphatic system, all the glands, all the muscle, everything, all the organs, all sensory, right? And it's a limitless universe that we can tune into. And as we do, we start off with kind of what we think of as gross physical sensation, right? Obviously, the sense of touch. And there's a sense of touch on the surface of the skin, which travels through a separate set of neural networks to the brain. And then there's internal sensation, touch, that we access through what's called interoception, which is just a fancy word for internal perception. But it travels through different neural networks to the brain, which are not as myelated, not as efficient. So internal sensations tend to be subtler, unless we're experiencing some kind of significant pain. But nonetheless, they're very experiential. And it's really awakening to that inner world, which is what makes neurosomatic mindfulness different and unique, and what I think really opens the door to deep development, because by yoking our attention with that, and the more we open to it, it becomes very compelling. So it's not difficult. Our attention is kind of organically yokes with it because it's so compelling. And And then we're anchored in the moment. We're anchored in what's actually arising in the moment. And that creates this shift from the default mode network, which people in the psychedelic space will be aware of. They hear a lot about they think one of the transformative healing mechanisms of psychedelics is that they dampen the activity of the default mode network, which is a noisy part of our brain that's always doing the self-sensing and ruminating about the past, the present, the future, all our opinions, all that's constantly recreating the self, and also the source of a lot of our self-created stress. It has its purpose. If we can free it from the fear and anxiety of the human condition, it's a place of tremendous creativity. But for most of it, it's a source of ongoing stress, and it's kind of where we maintain and create the ego and so forth. So when that goes offline, we're open to this whole other spectrum, and that's at least in part what may be happening with many of the psychedelic medicines. But we can also do this through awareness practices. And so there's another neural network called the task positive network. And when we really yoke our attention, I mean, it could be anything. When we direct our attention, we're engaging the task positive network. But the more thoroughly and consistently we've engaged that network, that and the pulmonal network have a mutually inhibitory relationship to a degree. So we engage the task positive network, the pulmonal network starts to go offline, and we don't have to struggle with the busy mind or the thoughts. It just quiets down naturally. And we start to experience really uh, deep attention stabilization. The mind really deepens and steadies, and our attention is thoroughly stabilized, so we don't have to make much effort anymore. So we move from intentional effortful self-regulation, which any practice is, into effortless mindfulness and effortless awareness. And this then becomes the portal into deep states of awareness, deep states of flow, and really into what the Eastern traditions call various levels of samadhi, of which there are many. But part of what's also happening, and the word flow is both, does have connection to the work around flow states, Csikszentmihalyi's work and Csikszentmihalyi's work, and also, Stephen Kotler and others talk about the flow states. But part of what's happening there is that all the internal systems of the body all emit energy, right? And they all have their periodicity of their waveforms, right? Their wave frequencies. So we know we have different brain waves, alpha, beta, delta, gamma, and so forth. And we can do neurobiofeedback and, tune into that with machines. We know we have the rhythm of our breath, how many breaths a minute. We know we have a heartbeat, how many heartbeats a minute. But every organ and gland in the body is emitting energy at different frequencies. And the deeper we drop into the body and the more we activate interoceptive awareness, all these internal systems, they start to cohere. They start to map onto each other. Like one might be going up and down, with its frequency 2 times a minute, the other's going 4 times a minute, but they can cohere so they can map on. So, or it'd be more likely 2 times or 4 times a second. But we start to experience this tangible resonance, coherence, this palpable flow. And that grounds us even more. Our awareness can just rest in there. So our practice becomes more and more and more effortless, and we're dropping into deeper and deeper states of attention stabilization, awareness, and flow, which then is really the entry world into these samadhi states, which are profoundly healing. On the one hand, the extent that we're in these states, our nervous system is starting to untangle itself, and we're starting to release the traumas and so forth, and that can create momentary disruptions and so forth. But overall, we're weaving a structure that can allow all that stuff to come out and be healed, because in doing the practice as I'm describing it, we're weaving a neural structure of tremendous resilience, right? That gives us the capacity to really drop in and experience anything, even significant disruptions that might kind of erupt on us as our nervous system is healing itself. But also in these deep states, we get insights into the nature of mind, the nature of reality, which is really ultimately where liberation arises from, because we actually see how suffering arises, we see how confusion arises, and we experience the undifferentiated states out of which it arises but doesn't need to arise, right? So we start to really get into the nature of mind, the nature of reality through these deep states of flow. And the pathway in is, for me, the most efficacious pathway in is the body. We can work with mindfulness and awareness of anything, right? We can work with any sense perception, sight, sound, smell, taste. We can work with external visual images, internalized visual images, sounds, mantras. We can work with anything. We can take thought itself as the object of mindfulness or awareness. We can take awareness itself as the object of awareness. And all these are important practices, but all those practices require an already stabilized attention. Otherwise, you just get lost in that stuff. You try to take thoughts the arising of thoughts as the primary object of awareness, thoughts are very sticky. You're going to get caught up in them, right? So they require an already stabilized attention. And the most efficacious way to stabilize the attention is the body, for me anyway. And as we move from, original gross physical sensation we're experiencing, we're getting into subtler and subtler and subtler sensation, which is subtle body and then subtle mind and into deep states of being and consciousness. So it's all on one spectrum, right? So the body is a portal. Sometimes we tend to think of the body as a solid thing and it's separate from mind and maybe separate from consciousness, but it's all on a spectrum, right? None of it's separate. And so the further we go into the body, we're going into the subtler and subtler and subtler levels of experience, right? And so the body is just, and along the way, we're developing the structure, the vehicle, the crucible in which to do that work. And the last thing I'll say about that is some of where my work is now and what I'm really fascinated with is we now know the neural networks that are really involved, that are primarily involved. I mean, the brain, I should say first, the brain is one holistic, interdependent enterprise. And some scientists and neuroscientists today talk about, including Dan Siegel and others, that yes, we can talk about discrete neural networks and discrete parts of the brain, their functions and how they connect and what they do. But also the brain is more like this energetic flow, and there's this constant flow of energies and flows and so forth. So it operates in both those ways. But from the more discrete approach of neural networks, there are 5 principal neural networks that are involved in healing and in human evolution, self-actualization, and then the potential for actual liberation. The idea of complete enlightenment or liberation, which probably requires a nonlinear event that happens at some tipping point. But how we get close to that is developing these 5 neural networks into their optimal robustness, right? Which means we're actually adding more neural connections, more dendrites, in some cases more neurons, and we're developing what are, maybe faint little pathways through the grass becomes a really well-lit, well-paved, robust byway highway. And so these 5 are the attention network. That's pretty obvious. Any kind of mindfulness, we're training our attention. The self-regulation network, which is really foundational to human development, the ability to develop, to regulate our own autonomic nervous system, right? Which has the 2 branches that upregulate and downregulate. So if we can't regulate our own autonomic nervous system, then we're just kind of a victim of our surroundings, right? Everybody but us is regulating it. So, and if we can regulate our own autonomic nervous system, we can regulate our emotions, our behaviors, and that puts us in a self-leadership position in our life. So the self-regulation network, and then that's very connected to the emotion regulation network. And then I mentioned the task positive network, which kind of regulates the default mode network. And then finally, the empathy connection network, our ability to connect deeply with others. And all 5 of these neural networks are interconnected. And by developing all 5, there's a synergistic impact. Like 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 is not just 5, it's like 25 or more like 105 or so forth. And we now know how to target these networks very specifically with the current neuroimaging studies and the practices. We have access today to all the great practices from the yogic traditions, East and West, the ancient traditions, the indigenous traditions. We have all the modern neuroscience, positive psychology. We have access to everything. And so we can experiment with there and create our own practice stack, just like people talk about, their supplement stack and biohacking, or your tech stack when you're doing online business and so forth, or, even before people, audio files with stack components. So the idea of stacking, we can experiment with our own practice stack and start, 5 minutes this, put this one before that, or that one after that, or more of this, more of that, and use these different body-mind techniques, like different awareness techniques, different mindfulness techniques, visualization, affirmation, EFT tapping, all kinds of techniques. It could include psychedelics. We develop our own stack targeting these neural networks, and we can accelerate the path dramatically. The contrast to this is, a couple decades ago, you were told, go sit on the cushion and it'll work itself out. Well, if you got 30, 40 years and you can, spend most of your time in routine, it will work itself out. But I think we can be a lot kinder to people. I think people can, I think the majority of people that have ever started a meditation practice actually quit because they find it too hard. It's boring and it's not doing anything. Their mind's racing and it's just a struggle. And so And it's just so opposite to the rest of their life. But with these kind of neuroscience informed approaches, we can give people practices that they more quickly receive benefit from, and it works. Like they do it, and it starts working right away,
Can you
and have to
can you
spend.
touch on can you touch on some of the specific benefits that you've not only seen for yourself, but as people dive into the practice of neurosomatic mindfulness? Like, what are some of the specific tangible benefits people
Well,
experience from
well,
that?
well, let's think about it when these five neural networks I'm talking about are weak, right? And so, if we don't have much capacity for self-regulation, we all live in the interface between our childhood conditioning, whatever that was, and the world around us. Now, if our childhood conditioning was really benevolent and we lived in some benevolent bubble, but that's not the case for most of us. For most of us, our childhood conditioning was a mixed bag, and we have some good stuff and some gnarly stuff, and we live in a reactive relationship to that stuff between our childhood conditioning and the world around us. And the world around us is ever more challenging, right? So, and we're living there in an unconscious, reactive, habitual way. We may think we're free thinking adults making free thinking adult decisions, but we're not. Stimulus A1 comes up, we respond with response B2 every time. So we're leading a very mechanical, reactive life. And, if we have trauma and stuff from our childhood and the challenge of the world, we're in there just kind of getting pushed around and beat up. And, a lot of amygdala hijacking, very reactive, and, a lot of suffering and perpetuating suffering, reinforcing our own traumas and projecting our traumas onto others and sharing our trauma with others. And, so it's the whole world of how suffering is created. So if we have weak self-regulation networks, or we have never learned how to self-regulate, that's what life's going to look like. If we don't have a strong attention network, then we're constantly distracted, and we're at the mercy of, the world that's trying to flood us with distraction all the time. So if we have a weak attention network, we can't focus, we can't concentrate, we're distracted all the time. It's like ADHD, right? We hear so much about ADHD today, right? And so many people are diagnosed with that. Well, that's like you have a very, very weak attention network, right? Then, let's talk about the default network. So the default network is active when we don't focus our attention, and it creates a lot of our self-created stress because of the negativity bias. Job one for any species is survival. So, our brain is walking around with this conversation: I'm going to die, I'm going to starve to death, and if I don't procreate, my genes are not going to go forward. So it rules us. It rules our brain. It even rules us at the mitochondria and our cellular level, which is our awareness can, that's happening before our awareness can even catch up with it. So we need to build buffers between that. But otherwise, our world is just ruled by fear and survival. And so that colors the default mode network. And our default mode network is mostly negativity and stress and worry and anxiety, right? So if we don't have a strong task positive network, then we don't regulate that. We just have this noisy mind that's constantly creating suffering and stress for us and reinforcing the ego and all our opinions and get polarizing us and letting us, be pulled into the bubbles, the political bubbles that are going on today, the silos and so forth, because we don't have the strength of consciousness and awareness to not just be sucked into that. Then imagine if our empathy connection networks are very weak. Well, then we don't have the ability to create safety with each other. We don't have our lives, our relationships are conflictual, and they're not fulfilling, and we're prone to a lot of victim thinking and victim mindsets and so forth, because we're a victim of our conditioning in the world around us, because no one's taught us how to not do that, how to become conscious and actually get in the driver's seat of our own life. So, I think if you think about what life is like when these different neural networks are underdeveloped, then when you begin to develop them, you begin someone who's not living in a reactive way, someone who hardly ever experiences what's called the amygdala hijack, where we're hijacked by negative emotions, right? We're well balanced. We feel at ease. We experience a lot of equanimity. We're able to connect with others easily. We experience a lot of authentic connection in our lives, and which is all this is, we can either be in a non-virtuous cycle where it's just creating more and more suffering, or we start to get in a virtuous cycle, right? So our ability to lead a well-balanced life, to really experience the richness of our emotional life, but in a balanced way, not where we're getting hijacked, to have, a lot of presence of mind and attention and generally a pretty spacious mind, unless, if we want to use it and think about something. But if we're not, it's not just they're chattering away all the time. We have a very spacious mind. We're very naturally relational. We easily connect with others. We have our social engagement system online, so we're communicating safely. We're inviting others to connect. So just, what is a life like that? It starts to feel like a fairly enlightened life, right? So that's really the difference here. And we
If,
know more about how to make these changes and do this personal development than we ever have before.
yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to acknowledge, I mean, this interview is just kind of like a tiny little taste, of the wisdom that Fleet carries. And I just want to give like a plug, because I know this year Fleet is doing something really special where he's cultivating these like live retreats where people can come in and have an immersive experience and get trained and actually practice the neurosomatic mindfulness things. And so I really, really want to just encourage any of you that like are feeling called and want to know more, either reach out to me or connect with Fleet and his team, but we'll set you up so you get all that information, because like it is perhaps the most valuable thing we can train ourselves on, right? Like there's so much chaos and so much stress and so many things happening on, and so many people feel their lives, unconsciously get hijacked by either trauma or by stress or by all these things that like take them out of, those present flow states. And so the fact that you're actually guiding people to have conscious awareness of how to, master that, I think that's like a really powerful gift. I know we just have a few minutes now, but I would love for you to just like really quickly also touch on, for you, the roles of psychedelics with the mindfulness practices, and what you've noticed in terms of actually having those things be able to complement each other.
Yeah. So I kind of had my original era with psychedelics back in the 60s and early 70s, and was deep, deep into that world with LSD and mescaline and psilocybin. I lived in South America. I got deep into plant medicines, especially Guacamole, San Pedro, and things like that. I had all my journeys back then, and some of it was, albeit more recreational and a little wild, and some of it was deeply spiritual, some of it was ceremonial. It was all kind of a mix of things. And then I got completely away from it forever. And I've only recently sort of started re-engaging that well in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, as I saw this new movement emerge and got very interested, especially in the research showing how deeply beneficial some of these psychotherapeutic models are for people suffering severe trauma, especially veterans. And I do a lot of work with vets because I'm working with the criminal justice system, and a lot of them are in prison, and also a lot of them work in prison. So I'm very concerned about that. So I got very interested in what's going on there. And I have now done some retreats in the last couple of years, both here in the U.S. with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and then offshore one ayahuasca retreat. So, and gotten very involved in creating conferences, and gotten very involved in that world, and connected with a lot of the pioneers of that work, and the current kind of movers and shakers. And so our Heart Mind is very committed to providing a home for practicing psychedelic clinicians and so forth. And so some really interesting work that's going on is integrating awareness techniques with psychedelic experiences. And I think having an awareness practice is incredibly helpful when you're going through any kind of psychedelic experience at whatever level of dosage. Just that you're more familiar with your own mind. You know how to navigate your own mind, right? And so that's incredibly helpful to have some kind of awareness practice already. And I've already developed some of that neural architecture to give you the resilience and the strength to have the presence of mind within psychedelic experiences, especially higher dose experiences, to not panic, right? And, I had a few pretty serious bad trips back in the day in the 60s and 70s. I actually learned a lot from them in retrospect. They weren't fun at the time, but I learned a lot because they were basically ego death experiences I wasn't ready for, right? Um, and but there's also people experimenting now doing retreats where really integrating various types of meditation training and yogic training usually with lower dose ketamine, and then offshore with some other lower dose of plant medicines and so forth. And I think it's really interesting work. And I led one retreat in Nebraska last year that was integrating ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with neurosomatic mindfulness and some other type of process work that I've done trainings and seminars for years, some dyadic work and triad work and small group work of presencing and really, how to learn to really create connection really readily with others, and while being in oneself, the ability to be kind of simultaneously tracking one's own field while tracking the group field and connect with others. It just amplifies states of awareness altogether. So doing that work interspersed with the ketamine experiences or even on psychedelic or very low dose ketamine is fascinating. And we'll be doing a couple of retreats like that this year. And working with some wonderful clinicians. I do the meditation side, and I work with clinicians who are doing who are really expert in doing the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy side of it. And I'm also going to be offering just a straight neurosomatic mindfulness retreat, a 6-day retreat in March without the psychedelics. It'll just be a straight meditation retreat, but we'll be really going deep into developing and experimenting with stacking these different practices to really access and directly impact and strengthen these 5 neural networks I was talking about. So yeah, lot going on there.
That's amazing, amazing, amazing. So what's the best way for people that like want to, and I get it for people that are listening, it's like, oh my gosh, this was way too short. Don't worry, we'll do more with Fleet in the future. And Heart Mind Institute has a wealth of amazing resources as you continue on your journey for mindfulness and like really exploring these expanded states of consciousness. But Fleet, what's the best way for people that feel called to connect more with your work and also learn about some of these opportunities that you have?
Yeah. I would just go to heartmind.co, heartmind.co, and you'll see all about our summits and courses there. And we have a great membership program. It's very inexpensive, where you have access to all of our courses and summits, past, present, and future. It's probably like 1,000 hours of transformational content from all the great wisdom teachers the world over, and current clinicians and experts, and really amazing. But we're also creating curated experiences within that, because just all that content could be overwhelming. So we're helping people navigate that by, creating weekly and monthly themes and activities and highlighted videos and different curated experiences and meetups. So we're really working hard to build community within that, but people have access to this treasure trove of amazing, the summits we've done around psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, the expanded state summits, the global resilience summits, the neuromastery summits, the rewiring your brain for life optimization summits, and all these kind of things. And so people have access to all of that, but people can also just tune into one of our summits. Our summits are all put out there for free. And unfortunately, some people purchase the lifetime access or membership, which is how we are able to keep our business going and support our team and keep doing this. But our summits have reached over 1.5 million people worldwide now, and the vast majority enjoy that for free. So
Amazing.
People are welcome to enjoy everything we're producing for free. And if people want to invest in themselves and invest with us, we really appreciate that as well.
Well, thank you so much, Fleet. Thank you for the work that you do in the world, and thanks for showing up and being part of Psychedelic Sex and the Superconscious. For everyone that's joined us today, please come back. We got so many juicy conversations as we continue on this journey of learning how to access the higher mind. Thank you. This is Gerald Rogers reminding you, you have one life, so make it legendary. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you, legendary explorers, for joining us on this cosmic journey today.
Your curiosity fuels our exploration of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
If you're hungry for more, dive into our website and connect with us on social media. All the links are in the show notes.
And stay tuned for our next mind-expanding episode. We can't wait to talk to you again in our next adventure.
Until then, remember, this is your life. So,
make it legendary.